I'm gonna touch on some TPMS stuff here. And what we got here, the reason we have TPMS face this way. There you go. The reason we have TPMS is we got a Firestone tire recall. Now, some of you might remember whenever the Firestone tires were blowing out and killing people. You remember anything about that? We had one guy, Bridgestone, Firestone, they actually would, the tires were coming apart and all that. And there were some tires that they basically made them take off the shelf and all that kind of stuff. And big
tires
hole.
on my truck.
Huh? Yeah.
Tires on my truck.
Well, it's not to say Firestone tires were bad, but there were some that they recalled. But it was not so much as because of the tire. A lot of it was because whenever they went low on air and people weren't paying attention, and that low on air kept working the tread like it did, you know how the tire distorts whenever it's low on air, it would actually cause the tread to come loose from the steel belts, and it would, you know, come apart, and it would cause, like on SUVs and stuff, it caused them to flip over and stuff, kind of like Daniel's white one did when the tread came off of that one and all that. And it basically, they lost their tread when they were run underinflated, and friction heated them beyond their capability to handle it, so they got hotter and hotter and hotter when they came apart. They blew out or delaminated, and so the vehicles rolled over. So that pushed the Clinton administration to legislate the TREAD Act, and that mandated the use of a suitable TPMS technology in all light motor vehicles under 10,000 pounds to help alert drivers of severe underinflation events. Now, some TPMS systems, I'll stop right here, don't have sensors as far as actually sensors monitoring the pressure of the tire. One such example was the 2007, there's a little Toyota, funky little Toyota that the lady up front used to drive. She's driving a different car now. It didn't have any sensors, but it would turn on a TPMS warning light if any of the tires got low. So what do you think it did?
Was it wheel speed sensor?
Yeah, it would actually look at the tire and started rolling faster. The only problem is, if one tire starts rolling faster than the rest of them, that's reliable. Ford did that on some of their Winstars and stuff. But if all four tires lose the pressure equally, that's really not good. And some of the really, really late model Asian cars have gone back to this instead of having the TPMS. But anyway, it helps alert the drivers of severe underinflation events. Humvees, the military ones, have got a deal set up, hooked up so that they automatically keep the tire pressure set. And some of your big trucks do too. They've actually got the tire, you know, the air compressor system hooked in there so they'll air the tires up automatically if the pressure gets low. But anyway, it's since been illegal for an automobile repair facility to knowingly not reinstall a functioning TPMS system if it arrived at the facility with a functioning TPMS system. Now, if it comes in and the TPMS system's not working, it's not illegal for you to let it out of the shop without it working. But if it comes in with a TPMS working, you're not supposed to let it leave the shop with it not working. That's against the law. It needs to leave working if it came in working. Now, what does that mean? If you manage to bust one of the sensors while you're breaking the tires down, all that kind of stuff, then somebody's going to have to buy another TPMS sensor. If you bust a sensor on some of these high-end European cars like the BMWs and the Mercedes, you may be paying $200 or $300 per sensor. See what I mean? Nothing cheap about those. And, basically, sensors only transmit. They don't receive when they're on the vehicle. They're not listening to anything. They're just talking, okay? And basically, that's what it looks like. You got a battery, you got a pressure sensor, you got an antenna. The pressure sensor that's in there not only tells you what the pressure in the tire is, but it also, there's a switch in there that turns the sensor on whenever it gets pressure. So if you actually have a tire pressure sensor laying on the shelf and you try to shoot your tire pressure monitor tool at it, you're not going to get it to do anything because it's totally asleep. It's turned off until it sees tire pressure. Got me? All right, so they receive signals when it's in Relearn and the tool's held next to the tire. Well, if you hold the tool next to the tire the way you see me doing right here, well, I got one like that, but that's not my hand. And then there's another one right there. There's a whole gaggle of these things. There's a bunch of different ones of them. The tool excites the transmitting antenna, and more or less tickles the sensor to get a response. So, sensors generally have an accelerometer, and this is interesting, and probably most of us didn't know this, activated by movement. They send their little packets of data when movement happens or if the sensor detects sudden low pressure. So if the pressure drops really low, they start to transmit. If you're moving, they start to transmit. Every quarter minute, half minute, or every 60 seconds, depending on the sensor. Okay? Whenever it goes to sleep, if the sensor doesn't feel motion, it'll go to sleep 10 to 20 minutes after the car's in park. This is not a stupid part. It's got some brains about it, you know. Now, if a relearn procedure is attempted with active sensors, the system might hear more than one sensor talking at a time, and that can confuse you in some cases and on some systems. It's real aggravating sometimes when you're trying to shoot them and they won't talk, or they don't seem to be talking right, or they'll talk one time but they won't talk. They'll talk on one tire but not the next tire, and then you just fight with them sometimes. Some of them may need to be driven a certain distance so the TPMS module can match the sensor IDs and locations. Now, the interesting one, one of the interesting ones to me is the Nissan. Some of the Nissans, the Altimas and stuff, what you're supposed to do if you don't have their fancy tool is you're supposed to set the tire pressures at like the right front one at 26, the left front one at 28. The left, you go up 2 pounds for each sensor or something like that, and it's going to assume you've got the tire pressure set accurately at these various readings. And then when you drive it, it goes by the pressures it's getting to identify where the sensors are. Now, if you're driving one that just has the little tire pressure light with the exclamation point, it doesn't need to know where they are because it's not actually doing anything except just watching the tires. It's not watching its phone like Zane's do it. Okay, they'll say, I'm here, and they'll tell them. Now, if this got to be done in the right sequence if you're doing it with the tool. The GM is left, F, RF, RR, and LR, or the module won't know which sensor's on which chart. So you mash both of the, on the GM typically, you mash both the lock and unlock buttons on the fob, and then it'll put it in a mode, you'll hear it honk, and then you'll go from left front to right rear to left rear, and that's the way it knows where they all are. Sometimes you'll see one where somebody has put a whole bunch of air in one tire because on the Impalas that Jim drives from up at the Greenville campus, whenever he goes to one of that tire store over there and they actually rotate the tires without resetting the sensors, because I don't know if they have a TPMS tool or not, but they forget to reset the sensors, and then it'll tell him the left rear tire is low on air, or 4 or 5 pounds low, and somebody will go to the left rear tire and start just pumping all kinds of air in there. Well, it doesn't know that the left rear tire's been moved to the right front. And so you'll have like 50 pounds of air in the tire that he thought was low when the one that was actually low. See what I mean? Because they didn't relearn the sensors and tell them where they were. And I'd be surprised how many times that's happened on cars like that. So you always got to think about the fact that the sensors may not have been taught where they were. That's something that's really important to do there. All right, now, don't bust it. If it's got a nut, take it off and let the sensor fall into the tire. Now, I got a guy that's going to do a video in a minute. It's pretty good little short, a few minutes, very 4 or 5 minute video. If the sensor has a rubber stem, break the tire B 90 degrees from the stem location and be careful not to break the sensor when removing the tire from the wheel. If you see that rubber stem sticking out, it may have a sensor and it may not. You don't know. Some of them will have a sensor. Have a sensor in them, but it'll look just like a regular valve. Don't fiddle with your phone and pay attention to what's coming on the next slide. See, that's what it says on the slide, because I knew Zane would be fiddling with his phone. All right. I'm going to see if I can get this guy's video to play. I may have to go find it in here, because I got it in the, I'm going to play it. I'll play that video when I'm through. It's pretty cool, though. It's real short, and I probably didn't build a presentation right where it would play the video. It played it in there, but it won't play it on this machine. Most sensors are calibrated to a cold tire pressure for a particular vehicle, but procedures are vehicle specific. All right. Now here's the thing. How does ambient temperature influence tire pressure? For each 10 degrees Fahrenheit of ambient temperature, tire pressures will change about 2% or about 1 psi. All right. So when temperature changes in some parts of the country, that could mean a difference of 5 psi, and that could turn on a tire pressure light. And the tires will heat up while driving, and sometimes that causes them to go off. So if somebody says, my tire pressure light's coming on, it's going off, it's coming on, it's going off, it basically has to do a lot of the times with the temperature of the tire, the temperature of the ambient, and all that. Now, the best investment a consumer in their shop can make for servicing TPMS is use good tire pressure gauges. Now, this one here is a cheapie, but I mean, I like having an electronic one around out here, and I got to get the one that we've got that we've been using, it was pretty good. It's getting, where's reading all over the place, so I got to get a better one. Handle the gauge with care. Even if it's an electronic gauge, if you drop it from 4 inches, you can make it lose its calibration, even if it's an electronic gauge. And somebody just bounced this one off the floor earlier today, so it probably doesn't read right anymore at all. Okay, this goes for digital and analog gauges alike. Now, what signals from inside the shop can interfere with TPMS signals? Most tire pressure sensors are activated with a 125 kilohertz signal, but the activation frequency varies from vehicle to vehicle because some require more power to trigger sensor transmission than others. Sensors then transmit information and communicate via a UHF signal, which is a lot higher frequency than that one, which is 314.9 to 433.92. You might even notice this little brick tool I got out here has got 4 different frequencies listed on it that it flashes through when it's trying to get one to talk. Anything that transmits in that window can cause interference, but that scenario isn't very common. You don't usually have that, but metal can block the signal, and blocking is a form of interference as well. And so, that's why you don't hold your tire pressure down there by the, rim. You hold it up there by the tire, so to speak. Okay. So what parts of it can be reused? Technically, you're not supposed to reuse the nut, the grommets, or the valve stem. Now, I don't know at the times I've seen these little grommets here where somebody had pulled it off and just put it back on, and there would be trash on there, and you'd have a leak. There was a girl that came in here. I mentioned that the other day after y'all. She came. I was getting ready to close the shop, and she came up and she had a flat tire that looked like a nearly brand new tire. And when she was talking on the phone, she was talking to her mother, I guess, and she says, it may be that I sprayed all over that tire looking for a leak, and it was, it was pretty low on air. And she says, and I had actually looked at the valve core, but not around the stem. And she mentioned to her mother that her other 3 had already, of these, they looked just like that one, had already been removed because they were all leaking. And then I sprayed around that down by the hubcap, and it was big bubbles coming from around, that. And so she said, just get that thing out of there. She said, I don't even want it because her TPMS system was already dead anyway. She'd already got rid of 3 of the sensors because they kept leaking. Anyway, that's an expense. Anyway, the rule is not followed, usually. What you're supposed to have is a kit that's got all of the stuff in it that you need to do the TPMS right. The nuts, the grommets, spare sensors, universal sensors, and all that kind of thing. The seal and grommets are engineered to work at a certain torque. Anything more can cause a seal to leak. So you will tighten the nut on a sensor to fix the leak. Well, sometimes, but usually you're going to make more of a leak. Or, I like to basically, if I'm going to reuse a grommet, wipe it off really good, make sure it doesn't have any bumps on it or anything. But you can damage the nut of the sensor by over tightening it. That's bubbles leaking out around one. That's from a video that I made, put on YouTube. That's you should clean the rubber grommet with a rag and gentle detergent, basically. All right. So, are TPMS sensors able to report on the status of their battery life? Some of them yes, some of them no. Some of them will tell you what kind of shape the battery's in and how much longer it's supposed to last. Temperature changes, if it's colder, can affect battery voltage. It will change as the tires warm up. You know how batteries have a tendency to get weaker when it's colder? Or how you can take batteries that are dead and set them in front of the fireplace and then grab them with a cloth and juke them in the radio and it'll play as long as batteries are hot. The temperature is going to affect batteries just like a car battery. TPMS batteries got a long shelf life though, and the sensor doesn't turn on until the tire pressure rises above a certain PFI. Battery life depends on sample rate, drive cycles, environment, and sensor batteries usually last about 70,000 to 100,000 miles or 7 to 10 years if you're left-handed. Okay, everybody got that? That's some pretty good stuff here. Can the tire type and or placard value be changed if aftermarket tires or wheels are installed? Okay, this is basically found where? Inside the door. Inside the door usually. Sometimes it's actually on the sticker where the VIN is. You'll actually see the tire pressures on that on some of the Ford vehicles. The tire type and placard value are stored in the TPMS receiver. Look at there about spell check didn't catch that, right? And I should have put TIPE, right? Nobody's laughing about that, right? That's not TIPE, it's TYPE. Its calibration can be changed by flash programming on some vehicles. On some of them, you can actually flash it. Since the low pressure number is calculated as a percentage of the number that appears on the placard, correcting the values will bring it back into compliance with the law. Okay, so what if somebody says, I'm sick of seeing that stupid light, can the TPMS legally be turned off? It's mandatory in the United States and cannot be legally disabled by any service provider. In other words, if somebody's just tired of looking at their TPMS, it's illegal to have somebody disable it. And you're not really allowed to do it yourself either. All right. So will a tire pressure sensor fit in my fancy new wheels? Not always. If the valve stem hole is placed in such a way the motion detection components inside the sensor won't work correctly, that's a problem. Then there's other problems as well. One of the other instructors brought his hot rod car over here, and it had TPMS light on, and somebody had put sensors in his fancy $1,200 wheels. They were supposed to work, but as I was shooting with the tool, his were supposed to have the higher frequency sensors, and this one here had the lower frequency. See, they put low frequency sensors where they needed a higher frequency one, and it couldn't read his tire pressures because it was kind of an incompatibility deal. And so, anyway, why are dashes or a pressure value of 148 psi sometimes displayed after a battery disconnect? After the car battery, not the battery. It's waiting for updated pressure information to be sent from the tire pressure. 148 means I don't know what the pressure is, so I'm just going to shoot high, right? The display seen here, though, indicates a dead sensor. See, that's what that whole thing right there is all about. All right. Some vehicles, no BD2 system port can be used for relearning and troubleshooting. And this is a whole bevy of tools that you can get. These Altel people have a really nice one. And a lot of people, I've heard other people get those. They really like the TPMS stuff that they make. But a lot of them made. The one that I have is an OTC, and then I got that red one. So you got three basic types of replacements. You got a direct replacement, that's OEM. You need to let the TPMS know where they are, but that's all. If it's one of those that reports the pressure for each wheel. Programmable sensors are blank and have to be programmed. You got to have a tool with the capability to tell a sensor how it's supposed to act. But if you got a sensor that's still somewhat active, it may be that the old sensor information can be pulled by your tool and written into the new one. You can clone the sensors that way. We've actually had to do that on some of the modules and stuff. Whenever I used to replace some of the modules on some of these vehicles, I would actually take the scan tool, tell it I was going to replace a reprogrammable module. It would grab the data out of that module, and then it would tell me to go ahead and change a module. I put the new module on there, and then I would tell it that I had replaced it, and it would write it in, and there'd be no problem. One time I failed to do that on an ABS module, and the speedometer wouldn't work. So then
Can it be reprogrammed constantly?
Huh?
Can it be constantly reprogrammed, or is it a one-time?
No, you can reflash them again and again. That's not a problem. Now, some of the earlier Ford instrument clusters, if you were changing the tire size using the little buttons, you couldn't do it but 3 times on the older ones and 6 times on the ones that were slightly newer. But that was only on an instrument cluster situation. But yeah, that was a good question. Universal sensors are programmed to be compatible with many vehicles, because you may have to do a bit of work with your tool to make them work right. The reprogramming thing you were talking about, usually the only time they'll prevent you from doing that is if it has something to do with anti-theft. So it's like I said, if you tell a engine controller that the vehicle has anti-theft when it doesn't, there's no way you can fix that. You can't back up and tell it doesn't have any theft for obvious reasons, because they don't want somebody to be able to tell it doesn't have any theft and then steal the car. Okay, on the other ones, there is one, Donnie, my friend, had put a control head, AC control head in, and he was fooling with the scan tool on the control head, and it says, does it have an ambient temperature sensor? Well, just about all of those did. He didn't look, he just said yes. And then when he got through, he had a error light flashing because it didn't have ambient temperature sensor, and it was looking for something that wasn't there. So he calls them back and he says, what has happened there? And they said, well, it doesn't have ambient temperature, and you told it did. He said, well, what do I need to do now? And he says, you need to order another head. And he says, how am I supposed to know this? He said, by doing it, I guess. He says, so it's burn, learn, and learn. You burned it in, you ruined it, and now you learned that you're not supposed to do it again. Well, anytime we're telling some, anytime you're making any kind of changes that's gonna be written into the module, what he was thinking was intelligent, because you can screw up a really expensive module by punching the wrong button on your tool. You got me? So it's just really important not to go there. And that right there is the end of the slideshow. All right. Tell me something you learned.
Can't turn off any films.
Huh?
Can't turn off any films.
Yeah. Well, about TPMS, what'd you pick up?
Electronic program, you can mess up some other stuff.
Yeah. What was something else?
I got high and low frequencies.
Did you know they have an accelerometer in them? You know what an accelerometer is? Tells it when it's moving.
I thought it was interesting that, what was it, that they basically aren't on the pressure switch.
Yeah, I mean, they're not gonna be on all the time. They're only gonna be turned on whenever you put pressure in there. And the pressure's gotta be above a certain level, that kind of thing.
I think it was probably the same thing you said. Like whenever you, when it doesn't sense motion, it'll go to sleep. So
Yeah.
it's hard to test it, not sensible.
Have you heard any of that before? I mean, that's pretty cool stuff, isn't it? I did a fair amount of research putting this together.
Is there a way to test one without there being any pressure?
Now that I know of,
With like a multimeter or anything?
I don't think so. What you're basically gonna have to do is, put it in a tire of some kind and pressure it up. And, the antenna is actually the valve stem, usually.
Shoot air into it.
Huh?
Did you shoot air into it?
Well, yeah,
There's
theoretically,
probably
you
a
might be able to
regular
take your
way to do
rubber tip blower and fire some air in there, yeah. I mean, I guess you might be able to do that, and it would, but if you put it in if you think about it, if you could build a little pressure tank, an air pressure tank, and put the lid on it and put air in there.
You'd have to seal the back of it though.
Yeah, that's right. So there'd have to be something that wasn't metal, what I mean, so you'd have to have something pretty strong. I guess you could use a drink bottle or something like that, huh? But,